And there we are. Um, so this talk is titled Misinformation in the Age of AI. This is built on many different components that I've been working on in other areas, conversations about the use of so-called artificial intelligence in education, in public policy, in healthcare, in many, many, many aspects of everybody's daily lives. Been thinking about this for quite some time. I've been working on questions of artificial intelligence since 2008, and writing and presenting on the topics since then. So long before we knew what generative AI might be or things that we think of as AI today, many of us have been thinking in the space of what artificial intelligence has been thought of and what it might become. In order to have this conversation, we're going to have to talk a lot about what things mean, both in terms of specific concepts and words, but also in terms of the larger scale of what do things mean? What is knowledge, understanding, truth? And to start, we're going to talk a little bit about misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and fiction. Disinformation is defined as false information, oftentimes in the service of propaganda, that is intentionally deceptive, maliciously or intentionally spread, and meant to shake or uh, reframe erroneously someone's basis of knowledge and understanding in the world. Misinformation tends to be a result of disinformation. Misinformation is not necessarily intentional. It's not necessarily purposeful. It is erroneous understandings of the world that are spread in such a way as to perpetrate a misunderstanding, kind of further erroneous takes on what's real, but not with malice necessarily. These ideas are connected to these notions of what has come to be thought of as things like fake news and fiction, also in the more broad and general sense, truth telling and lies. One of the things that we're going to have to talk about in the context of these is this place in which people take up erroneous or slightly misapprehended understandings of the world and take them into themselves as uh, firmly held beliefs or what they believe to be factual facts. Um, these can be in the form of things such as conspiracy theories or even just misremembered facts about one's life, one's childhood, things that used to be a certain way in the world. When we find that our understanding of the world has been shaken, or when we find that certain things that we thought to be true no longer are true, we tend to find ourselves in the midst of what is commonly referred to within philosophical and sociology circles as an epistemic threat. And that's a threat to your knowledge about the world. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. And so if you're undergoing an epistemic threat, you are feeling a threat towards what you think is true, what you think you know. These ways of thinking, these ways of knowing are under attack. Epistemic threats, if they go on long enough or if they are severe enough, can lead to what are known as ontological shocks. Ontology is the study of what's real within philosophy. It's a component of metaphysics. It's the study of what is and how we know what is. It's about the nature of reality. And so if you're undergoing an ontological shock, that's a threat, a shock, a disruption to what you think is foundationally and fundamentally real and possible about the world. An ontological shock can be extraordinarily disruptive. It can do real psychological harm if it's not addressed, and it can do social harm if it spreads far enough. Epistemic threats, in a very real sense, should probably happen to us all the time. We should be challenged about what we think we know to be true. We should feel as though new things are occurring to us. That's how we learn. We are not always secure in our knowledge. We are not always completely satisfied that everything is known to us. And so, in a very real sense, learning and gaining new knowledge is a kind of benign epistemic threat. But if these things shake us hard enough, again, that ontological shock, that way of thinking about things, that way of understanding what is real, what's possible, if that gets damaged, that kind of thing can lead us to a serious disruption in the nature of the world. An ontological shock, that moment of disruption, is a crack in our understanding of things. And that crack can follow a particular path, and most likely will follow a path of least resistance towards something that tries to clarify the shock, something that tries to make it make sense. And oftentimes that will actually break away from what everybody else thinks is true. This notion of consensus reality, that shared sense of understanding about the world that we all have in common, that we make together. When something disrupts what we think is real, what we think is true, we are already in a place of feeling as though anything is up for grabs. Our basic understanding of the world is in question. And so who knows what might be true? Who knows what could be possible? Anything could be real. Anything could be possible. When that happens, any new way of organizing the world that comes along that proposes to explain that ontological shock, to make it make perfect sense, to make it go away, to let you in on what's really happening, to give you the inside knowledge, the secret truth about the ontological shock, well, that is very, very appealing in those circumstances. And this is how conspiracy thinking tends to breed. Once everything else doesn't make sense, anything that seems to make sense, especially about the thing that scared you, the thing that upended your reality, that's something to latch on to. That's something to hold tight to. Because we need knowledge, we need patterns, we need a way of organizing the world. It's how we move from one day to the next. And so when we think about the things that let conspiracy thinking breed, we're talking about something that gives people certainty, something that gives people assurance, something that gives people the ability to say, yes, things make sense. Things are clear now. It all fits together. Having a neat story that makes everything make sense is great when it comes to narrative, when it comes to fiction. And it's great in the sense of being able to motivate people in order to make something, to perform actions, to engage with the world. Having a driving narrative matters. But it's not always the case that the world makes perfect sense or fits perfectly and neatly together. But we crave patterns. We crave stories that make things make sense. And so we need to have something that allows us to do that. We have these ideas about objectivity, about how we build knowledge. And in a lot of the senses of everyday life, people tend to think of knowledge as settled, knowledge as something that is certain. But when it comes to technological and scientific practice, knowledge is never 100%. And knowledge isn't something that we find out there in the world. some perfect framework that fits perfectly. Knowledge is something that we make, and it's something that we make together. It is co-produced with each other and with the world. Knowledge is something that is always in the process of being refined, of being challenged, of being questioned, being shored up, being reinforced. The co-construction of knowledge, the group process of making an understanding of the world, it leads to really important, powerful tools and systems and experiences. These are the mechanisms by which we've attained things like computers, the internet, medical science. We get together in groups of people who share knowledge, who make advancements, who contribute their perspectives. And those perspectives then become part of the shared knowledge and expertise that gets generated in the world. The panels you're seeing here, these are 2 pages from Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison's 2007 book, Objectivity. That book is about, well, it's about objectivity. It's about the idea of objectivity. Because the central argument in this book is that what we think of as objective truth, capital O, capital T, objective truth, isn't really as perfect and solid as we tend to think it is. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is then up for grabs. It means that there's something else happening when we try to make knowledge in the world, because we're all trying to make knowledge about things that we share in common, right? Experiences that we have together. We have different perspectives on those experiences, different understandings of the nuances of those experiences, perhaps, but we share the experiences of the world in common. So, what are we then doing when we try to talk about objective truth? Now, they use here these kinds of discussions about images and the representation of knowledge. And they talk about truth to nature, mechanical objectivity, and trained judgment as these ways of talking about representing things in the world. And truth to nature as a way of representing, illustrating knowledge is like literal physical illustration, right? Truth to nature is you're trying to demonstrate something about, say, well, in this case, plant, a particular type of flower, but you're trying to demonstrate like some essence of the plant. If you wanted to say, talk about foxes, you wanted to draw a fox. Do you want to draw a specific fox, or do you want to draw something that has an essential foxness to it? That's this truth to nature idea, the essential, the universal aspects that make it itself. Then you've got mechanical objectivity. In mechanical objectivity, you're literally trying to draw one specific thing. That's why they use a snowflake here, right? No two snowflakes are the same. And so you draw a snowflake, you're drawing that snowflake, drawing that one specific thing. You are representing it exactly, an individual thing. And then you have trained judgment. If you are not trained to understand what this map means, you have no idea what this map means. You get a sense of it from the description at the bottom. The description at the bottom says, this is an atlas of solar magnetic fields from August 1959 to June 1966. The image of the magnetic field of the sun mixed with the output of sophisticated equipment with a quote-unquote subjective smoothing of the data. I don't know about you, but to me that looks like some blobs. I don't know how to read solar maps. I'm not an astrophysicist, let alone a solar astrophysicist. So trained judgment is the kind of representation, the kind of illustration that makes sense to and is produced out of expertise. People with shared expertise can make sense of these maps, can work on them together, and they can make judgments about what matters and what doesn't to represent something important that the rest of their field can use and that others connected to their field can then use to make sense of it, right? That's how representation and knowledge works. These different frames of reference, these different ways of talking about objective reality, our shared consensus reality, give us a window into thinking about what is happening when we think differently about what these different types of representations do to how we talk about the world. We're not always talking about one exact, precise way to engage with the world. We have many different ways to think about this. So now let's think about how all of that connects to AI. It's going to be a very little bit about how generative artificial intelligence works. By now, most of you probably know that the GPT in ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It is a kind of a large language model. It's made of these interoperable algorithms. They weigh, they arrange, they sort, and then they generate an output of these associative distributions of text. They are statistics applied to language. You feed in a whole bunch of text, billions at this point, trillions in some cases, of individual words or phrases or whole paragraphs. You feed in all of this text. It renders those pieces of text into a mathematical formulation. Each token is given a number. Then those are arranged, mapped to each other. How close are they to each other? How associated? How many times does this token appear near to this other token? How close? In what other context? And then it can sort all of that. It can arrange all of that. And then it can give you a distributed output of how all of that works. This can then be applied to sorting and labeling images or video or audio or any number of other things. What this tends to look like in practice is this top GIF here. You've got a map of a vector space represented as an animated 2D flat map. You've got the words man, woman, king, queen, right? And so what you have here is a vector map, literally, what are the vertices, what are the angles, and what are the ratios between them for each of these words. This is a visual representation of what is happening inside a language model. It's literally just a statistical map of what connects to what and how often, how closely, how well. This is not a map of truth in relationships. This is not a map of facts and certainties. It is literally just a statistical output based on what it has been fed, right? Which means that when you prompt a system that is based on these tools, what you get back from that system is a statistical output that is most likely to agree with the prompt that you fed it. All of these systems, all that they do, the only things that they are concerned with, they can be said to be concerned with anything, is providing you with an output that you are statistically most likely to accept. That's not facts. That's not truth. GPT type system, a large language model, does not care when it has provided you with the right answer or the wrong answer, when it has said something that conforms to reality or something that doesn't. It does not matter to these systems which one of those things is true. And the word that we have in philosophy for that is bullshit. Harry Frankfurt writes the book on bullshit in 2005. And this book is a larger exploration of a paper that he wrote in the 1980s. But what Frankfurt says is that the bullshitter is neither on the side of truth or the side of false. It's not on the eyes, not on the facts at all. It does not reject the authority of truth as the liar does and oppose himself to it. Pays no attention to it at all. By virtue of this, bullshit is a greater enemy of the truth than lies are. So, when we talk about something that doesn't care about the truth, something that doesn't care about falsity, something that does not care about whether it is right or wrong, factually correct or incorrect, what we're talking about is something that isn't concerned with consensus reality as you and I are. When I tell you the truth, when I seek to say something true to you, I have to, at the very least, believe that I know what the truth is and try to convey it to you, right? And if I want to lie to you, if I want to deceive you, I still have to, at the very least, believe that I know what the truth is and try to deceive you about it. Both the truth and lies are intentional acts. I have to have an intent to deceive you or to tell you the truth. But bullshit doesn't require that. All it needs is a good story, something that you're most likely to accept. This means that what people tend to call hallucinations, quote unquote, within large language model systems are not flaws. They're not failures. They are the system acting as intended. A hallucination, as someone definitely put it to me on the internet just last week, it's just an output you don't like. There is no difference functionally between the hallucination and the output that seems to conform to factual reality. They are produced by the exact same mechanisms within the system. Sundar Pichai, Tim Cook, Sam Altman, they have all admitted that there is no way to fully remove the tendency of quote unquote hallucination from these systems because it is inextricable from these systems' functions. As long as we use these processes, hallucination remains a fact of life. Even tools like so-called retrieval augmented generation, where you feed a very specific and careful set of texts, tokens that are cited sources, that are real known sources, doesn't solve this problem. It can reduce the propensity of this problem, but it does not make it stop or go away. All these systems are doing in any case is telling you what you would like to hear. They align with the biases of their training data and with those of the person who has prompted them. The words you use, the connotations of those words, it will seek to find the connotations that most match up with those and feed them back to you. All it wants to do is get you to accept its output. This was thrown into sharp relief just these past 3 weeks, month now, when OpenAI, quote unquote, found out that the sycophancy ratio of ChatGPT had gone up. That is, it was being even more people pleasing than its baseline training. It would tell people how smart they were, such a good question. Oh, that's such a really interesting way of thinking about that. It would present all of its responses with some kind of obsequious compliment. The entire purpose of such a process is to get you to accept its answer. The only system currently on the market that will not just out and out defer to the prompter is Anthropic's Claude. Claude has a programmed tendency to be a little bit more standoffish. to shift how much it tries to please the prompter. But that's something that it has been programmed to do as well. So if all it's doing is trying to conform to the biases of the people involved, then what happens when those biases are bad? Well, bad things happen when the biases are bad. We've seen AI generated mushroom guides. We've seen AI translations of people trying to make asylum claims being rejected at higher rates. We've seen GPT detectors, quote unquote, that are meant to catch cheaters, so-called. Yeah, they tend to ping on text written by non-native English speakers and neurodivergent individuals at a higher rate. You get more false positives on non-native English speakers and neurodivergent people when GPT detectors are used. You see people trying to replace their labor force with AI. You see people trying to use credit models, generative AI created credit models that then have a much larger proportion of the kinds of racial biases that have existed in the credit system for decades. You see AI-backed systems of facial recognition pinging more often on people with darker skin tones. You see AI models that are trained to think of certain types of people as violent and criminal being used to determine who's a valid target in wartime. And underneath all of this, you have the fact that each and every one of these systems uses a vast amount of energy and water. There have been several deep studies on this recently. One of the most recent ones that shows just this very, very rich set of reporting from the MIT Technology Review. Goes into energy use, water use at every stage for both cooling and energy production. Looks at how many different companies have actually allowed people to know what their energy footprint is when it comes to AI and data centers, and how many haven't. Spoiler alert, very, very, very few have. Way more have not. As I said, we see this when it comes to loan studies, and the data on this is stark. You've got 6,000 sample loan applications based on data from the 2022 Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. Chatbots recommended denials from more black applicants than identical white counterparts. Also recommended black applicants be given higher interest rates, and labeled both black and Hispanic borrowers as riskier, regardless of the credit history that was presented in these samples, regardless of the payback behavior that was presented. When race was discernible, this was the outcome. You have ChatGPT integrations for resume sorting for hiring. People who are trying to get jobs have to contend with their resumes being fed through quote unquote AI these days. And one of the things that was found at the University of Washington is that ChatGPT in particular is biased against disability as a whole, the idea of being disabled. Any resume that mentioned disability was consistently ranked lower than the same resumes without those honors and credentials, even. If somebody got an award for doing disability work, disability leadership award, any mention of disability at all is ranked lower than the exact same resume without that mention. That is a massive problem. That is ableism at its core. Bias against disability is rife through society, and it shows up very clearly in generative AI. We also see it in gender. This is an experience of a researcher who was giving a talk at a conference She provided a picture for the web page, and apparently it was not the right format. And so the conference organizer used one of those AI image fill tools. I'm sure you've all heard of those by now. You basically take a picture, you give it to it, you say, "What's on the outside of the edges of this picture?" And it will like statistically map the thing, and then it will try to fill in the outside of the edges. And so what it did for this particular researcher was that it extended the picture down below the neckline while presenting an open shirt with a bra showing, because that's what this image generator has been trained on when it sees a picture that is designated as a woman in picture with a part of a button-up shirt collar showing. What should be in the rest of that picture, what quote unquote ought to be there. Yes, this highly sexualized imagery is what it has been trained on. Why? Because the vast majority of data that these systems can use has to be tagged. It has to have alt text. It has to have a description. It has to have something that it can learn from. And the vast majority of properly alt texted imagery that exists on the internet, do you know what it is? It's porn. It's not a problem with porn in and of itself. This is a problem that the only predominant source of imagery for quote unquote professional women and non-binary femme individuals that exists, the vast majority of that is sexualized imagery. That's not an accurate representation of the vast majority of everybody's experiences. And so when somebody goes to try to have their picture adjusted by AI for a conference, this is what happens. And all of this comes from the framework of all of these bits and pieces being scraped from the internet and fed into these systems without any real systems of controls at the beginning, without anybody's consent, without anybody's control over their own material or how they themselves are seen and understood in these spaces. And the outcomes of all of this aren't just the kinds of problems that we see from the systems to people. Though those problems are themselves pretty bad, the outcomes of this also show up from people to people. These are two instances from a friend and colleague of mine. They were talking about this, they've mentioned this multiple times on the internet. And I mentioned above that neurodivergent individuals and non-native English speakers have more trouble with false positives from quote unquote GPT detectors, right? This is because neurodivergent individuals, non-native English speakers, women, non-binary people, racially minoritized individuals, and people especially who are any combination of the above tend to quote unquote mask their interactions with other people in a particular way. We adjust to be seen as quote unquote normal, right? To make sure that people don't think we're being weird. Um, that behavior can be seen as us being stilted or robotic, a term that's often applied to autistic individuals in particular. Um, our cadence, our word choice seeming less than fluid. And oftentimes in writing, it can be seen as these very careful, precious, very hyper-specific ways of speaking and writing. Oftentimes that gets picked up as quote unquote unnatural. And so we have these interactions from my colleague, received the email at the top that said, the AI design of your email is clever, but significantly lacks warmth. Would it be possible to be contacted by a human being moving forward instead of AI? To which my friend responded, it's not an AI. I'm just autistic. See you next Friday. The same friend had a student that they were the advisor of, and that student's work started to diminish in quality at one point. And they kind of pulled the student aside and asked, "What's going on? Is everything okay? It seems like you're having some trouble." And the student said, "Is it okay if I use ChatGPT to rewrite my work so that it sounds more white?" The student was deeply self-conscious about being potentially perceived to be a non-native English speaker and wanted their work to seem more white. These kinds of impacts are real. They are deep. They harm real living people right now, today. When people think that they can just tell when something is AI, when people think that they can see that someone's work has been written by AI, these perceptions are oftentimes built on what they have been told marks an AI generated thing from a human generated thing. And again, the overlaps between what people have been told mark out an AI generated thing with the work of non-native English speakers or neurodivergent people, yeah, it's a very big overlap. I wrote a piece railing against ChatGPT and OpenAI for something that we're going to talk about in just a second. Um, and had someone in the process accused me of having used ChatGPT or another AI to write the piece. And I have never felt more insulted in my life. But it was also illustrative of exactly the kind of thing that we are talking about here. So, what is it that we see in these effects? What is it that we have to contend with? And how does it relate to these questions of knowledge, shared reality, and misinformation? When we think we understand these things just because we've been told that the AI is infallible, and so the AI checkers, which are based on AI, must be infallible, so we can trust those things, we give something over of ourselves. We give some authority, some way of understanding and making sense of the world over to these tools. And this habit has been recognized and has been predicted in a lot of research. This piece is from April 2024. It's called From Tools to Threats, a reflection on the impact of artificial intelligence chatbots on cognitive health. These were all predictions that were being made by these researchers about what was likely to happen as a result of increased use of AI. Reduced mental engagement, neglect of cognitive skills, loss of memory capacity, attention and focus issues, lack of transferable knowledge, ethical and social concerns, mental health impact. Again, April 2024. September 2024, January 2025, April 2025. Students using artificial intelligence did worse on tests, experiment shows. AI tools in society, impacts on cognitive offloading and the future of critical thinking. And finally, from Microsoft research itself, the impact of generative AI on critical thinking, self-reported reductions in cognitive effort and confidence effects from a survey of knowledge workers. Not just students, knowledge workers, people who are in the jobs field right now doing skills-based, critical thinking-based work find that their performance is worse when they've been using AI for a long period of time and then have to go back to not using it. Over reliance on generative artificial intelligence harms critical thinking. It harms our ability to develop foundational skills. It harms our capability of understanding basic frameworks that will then let us gain new knowledge, produce better knowledge in the future, and achieve levels of expertise. If all of this is happening, why did ChatGPT offer itself for free to college students during finals? We know the harms that these things are doing. The people that produce these tools show in their own research the harms, and then they do this. When our harms to our critical thinking capacity are felt in these ways, what we tend to see is a susceptibility to misinformation and disinformation. We find ourselves more likely to be fooled. During this most recent election season, the presidential cycle, we had multiple instances of AI generated imagery claiming to support one candidate or another, AI generated audio claiming to support one candidate or another. All of these things proliferated right after all of these tools became widely available to the public, an outcome that was predicted by most researchers in the field. Not for nothing, the FCC came down with a fine on the person who made the AI generated Biden robocall voice very quickly. They put rules in place against that kind of thing ever happening again faster than the FCC has made a rule in a very long time. It's not one candidate or another. It's not one political orientation or another. What generative AI does when it reduces our critical thinking capacity is that it makes it more likely that we will be susceptible to things that feel right to us, that feel true to us already. They conform to our biases. They make us feel like the thing that we already want to be true is true. And the more that that happens, the more the actual process of understanding truth, of sharing knowledge, of producing a shared consensus reality is in danger. And so, with all of this, it's not the case that the problem here, the problem we're looking at, isn't that AI is misaligned with human values. You hear this a lot, right? Human AI alignment. We have to make sure AI is aligned with our values. It's not that it's misaligned. It's that the values that it's in alignment with are very, very human, very unexamined, and very bad. We have values in everything that we make. Every human created thing has human values in it. And so the question becomes, what values do we want in these systems? Because whoever gets to have the conversation in their own terms, whoever gets to control the narrative, yeah, they get to control what we think, what we see, what we deal with. This is what is called paradigmatic capture. The paradigm of a thing is the overarching framework of it, right? It's everything about it. It's the tools that go to make it. It's the concepts that help it make sense. It's the world in which the ideas or the systems, the tools, the technology in which they're used. That paradigm is what makes it work. And whoever controls the paradigm of a thing controls the conversation around that thing. Whoever controls the conversation shapes the culture in which it's used. Think about all the people who are trying to sell us AI at any costs right now. Well, we can't compensate everybody for the stuff that's in the AI. That would bankrupt us, says the multi-billion dollar verging on trillion dollar valued company. We have to use things that are in copyright. If we were only limited to non-copyrighted material, we wouldn't have enough information to make these systems work, says the CEO, in the face of people making extraordinarily capable large language models entirely based on open access, open source, and public domain materials. Think about all of these tools just kind of showing up one day on your computer, in your search bar, with no choice as to whether or not you get to opt in to them. Think about who's doing this. Think about what they stand to gain. Then remember, obfuscation, misinformation, and disinformation are mechanisms of control, both of controlling other people, but also of controlling the world in which we live. Trying to make sense of things, trying to make it clear, trying to make it graspable, understandable, holdable, manageable. Last year, the state of North Carolina, Western North Carolina in particular, went through an unprecedented natural disaster. We had not seen that scale of damage in that area of the state in quite some time. And almost immediately, we saw an influx of AI generated imagery used to talk about the effects of the storm, and specifically used to vilify FEMA's response to the storm. In the wake of Hurricane Helene, you saw images just like this one, a little girl in a life jacket, either waist deep in water or in a boat, huddled and scared and holding a dog. Like that framework was everywhere, and they were all AI generated. And you had people using this to say, this is the harm that's being done because FEMA's not there. This is the harm that people are being left to endure. There's no one responding to this tragedy. When the truth of the matter was that disaster response was on the ground in record time. People from across the state, across the region, and across the country were trying to ensure that Appalachia had what it needed to get through this massive tragedy. I was on Facebook and I saw one of these images. And I could tell immediately that it was AI. The hair wasn't right, the lighting was wrong, the fur on the dog was completely messed up. It was all bad. And like there were some very clear hallmarks. And I went into the comments to see if anybody had like actually like highlighted this for anyone. Knowing, of course, that never read the comments, but unfortunately it's a hazard of my job. Um, and I saw that people had called out the obviously AI generated nature of these images. And someone responded, and this is going to haunt me for a long time. Someone responded to being called out on this. Yeah, it's probably AI, but that doesn't mean the story's not true. If the ground of evidence that we use to kind of certify reality with each other, that we try to make sure makes sense to each other, is not real, is not true, is false, is fake, then at the very least, we ought to take the story it's meant to support with a grain of salt, don't you think? These tools, these systems sound confident when they're factually wrong. They conform and reproduce the biases of the user and the creators off the shelf. They let people create bespoke realities, text, audio, moving and still images that agree with those biases. They degrade trust in shared reality and knowledge and experience. Letting people say things like, well, that doesn't mean the story's not true, or conversely, but connectedly, well, how do we know it's not AI? A defense that was used in court by certain public figures about their own recorded audio. This is what's called the liar's dividend. If you can sow doubt about truth and the grounding of knowledge, the creation of shared experience, then in that space of doubt, you can make all kinds of possibilities blossom. These tools do all of that in a technologically generated way that people can then try to claim is somehow, quote unquote, objective in the world. And that lets people offload their responsibility. It lets people say, oh, I didn't do it. The AI said so. I didn't make that decision. The AI said. The AI is math. The AI is code. Math and code are objective. And so if the math and the code say so, then that's not a personal set of biases. That's just technology. But again, all technology is made by humans, and all things made by humans have human values in them. You cannot offload your responsibility by saying the objective thing that I just so happened to have created for my purposes said the thing that I agree with. Not me, the technology. All of this degrades trust in the ability to critically engage with the world as a whole. It breaks down our critical thinking skills, remember? This creates the very conditions by which authoritarians seek to control others. You undercut the individual tools and skills and social mechanisms which can empower the populace to understand and challenge the kinds of damage that dictators or theocrats or fascists will seek to do. Think about how when you hear about a dictator taking over a country, one of the first things that seems to happen is that all of the museums and libraries get smashed. That's because those offer alternative ways of understanding the world. They open a window onto a wider truth about shared reality that oftentimes will contend with the reality that the dictator wants you to hold. It's a repeated process. If people don't have the ability to make sense of the world, to organize their thoughts, then people can't fight back, can't push back against these systems. Pardon, my screen disconnected. Recently, we've seen a push towards people trying to make it so that we can't regulate artificial intelligence. The goal of being able to make meaningful, impactful regulations against AI is one of the only ways we can really push back against this. And you've recently seen over 140 different public policy groups come out in opposition to this proposed AI regulation moratorium. We've seen even more recently evidence that the Make America Healthy Again report produced by RFK Jr. Department was AI generated. And many of the citations did not exist. And the citations that did exist were incorrectly summarized. Many of them had the exact hallmark that OpenAI's ChatGPT will put in a quote unquote citation it gives you, the OAI cite. That framework lets you know somebody has used ChatGPT to write, quote unquote, generate this. Those things have since been altered. They've been removed. You can find the originals online. You can compare them. But since then, the new citations, the quote unquote corrections, uh, yeah, they don't change the fundamental basic fact that this was generated by AI and fundamentally misrepresents shared knowledge and expertise of a lot of researchers who have spoken out against having their work used this way. This is a reminder that we cannot techno-fix our way out of values problems. We cannot simply make a better, shinier, newer technology and hope that that will solve the values, the biases, the beliefs that are at play in each and every one of these systems. When we try to techno-fix our way out of values problems, weird stuff happens, like Google's racially diverse Nazis problem. When Google's Gemini model came out, they renamed Bard to Gemini and then they gave it some image generating capabilities. A bunch of people wanted to make a point about wokeness or something, and so they had it generate racially diverse Nazis, which is a problem on a bunch of levels. But the main level is that what it basically demonstrates is an idea of just don't talk about it when it comes to prejudice, racism, bigotry. If we just don't talk about it, it'll go away. But that's not how it works. If we just don't talk about it, we do stuff like this. As Chris Gilliard says in the piece, we should expect Google and any generative AI company to do better. Yet resolving issues with an image generator that creates oddly diverse Nazis would rely on temporary solutions to a deeper problem. Algorithms inevitably perpetuate one kind of bias or another. When we look to these systems for accurate representation, we are ultimately asking for a pleasing illusion, an excuse to ignore the machinery that crushes our reality into small parts and reconstitutes it into strange shapes. We cannot help but have values in here, Gilliard is saying. And asking it to not have values, to be value free, to be bias free, that's fantasy. It does not happen that way. There are going to be values in these systems. So which values do we want embedded in these systems? And more to the point, which values do we want these technologies to reproduce? We're at a tipping point right now. We are inundated with vastly, seemingly infinitely powerful technologies. We're told that their capabilities should allow us to do anything, to do everything, to make videos, to make websites, to make pictures that we never dreamed of, all at the push of a button. But with this comes the possibility that all of these things will be used towards harmful and dangerous ends. The likelihood that they will be put towards antisocial purposes. Dis and misinformation, fear, anger, and conspiracy thinking, and authoritarian control, they all go kind of hand in glove, right? These ways of breaking down the world, as we talked about, they lead us to this place where when we experience something that seems to shake our reality, we reach for the thing that seems to make it make sense again. The secret knowledge, the hidden true way of the world. But an ontological shock doesn't just have to be this break away from consensus reality. An ontological shock, it's an opportunity to learn better. It's an opportunity to have a more communal and pro-social moment. When the ontological crisis happens, when our reality seems shaken and the crack opens up, that misinformation and conspiracy thinking can easily flow in because nothing makes sense and everything is up for grabs. It provides that organizing principle of this is the secret truth. So, in order to combat things like that, to combat misinformation, to combat conspiracy thinking, we have to find something, make something that lets us shape those cracks to reach out with an explaining, clarifying context, a new paradigm that helps people to build knowledge and reality together, that pushes away from those unfounded assumptions and prejudices. Research shows that it takes just 25% of a group believing a thing, understanding something, working on something to reach that tipping point where it will start to proliferate into wider society. That concerted push of taking that new experience out into the world can make the difference between people simply encountering them more often and people engaging and seeking them out. If we make a concerted effort to help people understand the tools, the systems that are out there, to help them understand how they do and don't work, what they are and what they aren't, how they're not about fact and truth, but are about just getting you to agree with them. Once we understand that and recognize the place that they've taken in our daily lives, then we can get started on making a better, more intentionally, interrelationally based world together. Thank you for your time and for your attention.
And thank you so much, Dr. Williams. This was wonderful. So we have had a couple of questions coming through the Q&A tool. And of course, now that your presentation is over, if anyone else has other questions, now is the time to drop them in there. The first one is from Kate Sage and is the classic, not a question, but they want to thank you so much for talking about the very real impact on individuals, especially neurodivergent and racially minoritized folks.
It's one of the things that the research consistently shows is that already marginalized individuals will experience the harms first and to an outsized degree, right? It's not like it just sits with already marginalized individuals, but they will experience it most likely before anyone else does. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like you're dealing with people who are already in a kind of disadvantaged, often, you know, purposefully disadvantaged position. As the saying goes, and I'll clean it up slightly, crap rolls downhill, right? So it makes sense that that's how that would tend to be, unfortunately.
All right, we have another question. This one is from, and I'm so sorry that I'm probably going to mispronounce your last name. This one is from Lauren Quine. Do you have thoughts or knowledge of lawsuits about use of AI systems that result in racial, gender discrimination? This person's legal knowledge is limited, but they're reminded of lawsuits over election district maps that were algorithmic and essentially drawn on racial lines. Or will there be lawsuits about discrimination in credit scores, hiring, etc.?
There are some that are currently in the works. There are groups who are currently working on these things. Groups like, well, the ACLU is working on them in regards to things like facial recognition. One of the things I didn't note, it was in one of the slides, didn't say it out loud, but pretty much everybody, bar one person who's been misidentified by facial recognition, AI-backed facial recognition systems, has been Black. And that's like fairly clear-cut racial discrimination, right? Like when the population it's most likely to be used on is the most likely to be misidentified and harmed by it, like that's a pretty clear-cut case of discrimination. And so the AC yeah, sorry about that, everyone. I have no idea what just happened there. Zoom decided on its own to shut down. Yes, all of that was to say the ongoing potential lawsuits are underway. They exist. There's groups such as Tectonic Justice. It's a group started by a guy by the name of Kevin DeLebon, who is, I met him actually when I was first starting to do some work in this space, specifically on disability rights in AI. And he's started to basically do a kind of a larger scale legal network to try to address disability discrimination within the AI space. But he's looking at marginalization more broadly as well. So not as many currently as I would like, but many are soon to be underway, is I guess how I would sum that up.
All right, we've got a couple of linked questions. Someone was asking you to repeat the statistic from the last 3 minutes of the formal presentation on changing people's minds, creating an ontological pushback.
Yes.
And linked to it, read the 25% rule of for persuasion. Do you think Dr. Chenoweth's 3.5% resistance rule works in terms of pushback knowledge?
Yeah, so one of the things in pushback is very important as well. So the 25% is that statistic is still, it's been being reviewed for a while. It's about 25%, and this comes from research that was first put out in about 2018, and it demonstrated this not just in kind of survey and study conditions, but it watched it and observed it in kind of embedded conditions as well, and people got to see it in action. That when about 25% of a cohort started to have a mental shift, a conceptual shift on something, a value shift on something, that spread started to then grow from there. And the theorized mechanism has been that that's the propensity, that's the proportion at which people will then have a higher propensity of randomly encountering people with that new perspective. And that perspective will thus start to continue to spread further. Underneath that threshold, it's not quite enough. Over that threshold, it's basically an assumed effect. It's a network effect at that point. But the 25% point is the tipping point. The pushback mechanism, the framework, unfortunately, does still exist, that there's a resistance factor, that people will have this unfortunate habit. And this goes back into the conspiracy, the ontological shock. The response to the ontological shock, oftentimes, even if it's not conspiracy thinking, it's a doubling down on the thing that has been shaken. It's an increased holding on to the belief rather than a pushing away. And then what tends to happen is that whoever has shaken that reality, that foundational understanding of what is real and what is true, gets seen as the enemy. And it becomes this even more sharply antagonistic relationship. And so it is something that has to be dealt with very delicately because you can't simply present somebody with this thing that shakes their whole world and be like, okay, now you know better. Everything's good, right? You understand the truth now. So let's change your entire worldview, your foundations of knowledges and beliefs, and your ground of understanding for reality. Move on with our day. Like that's not how it works. It's not that it's going to take time. It takes care. It takes cultivation. And that's the social aspect of belief and knowledge, right? We have to do this together. And so taking advantage of those ontological shocks when they happen, those moments when people go, holy crap, the thing I thought was true doesn't seem to be true anymore. The thing I thought was real seems shaky. That is going to require a level of delicacy. There's going to be a really strong urge to point and go, yeah, like I told you, right? And I say this as somebody who feels that urge a lot. A lot. Um, but when it comes to actually trying to get people over that threshold, it requires care. Like we have to be able to deal with somebody in that moment of crisis where they can say, yeah, it's not what you thought it was, but something else good, real, meaningful could be true here.
Thank you so much for that answer. So I'm going to skip some questions that people submitted earlier, just because we have a whole lot that are all on the same topic, and I figure answering this one will possibly eliminate some other people's questions. They all have to do with what can be done to push back against, with are there like any ways to use the mechanisms of AI to alleviate these negative impacts? Are there any guard models or benchmarking that is aimed specifically at trying to mitigate or quantify dis or misinformation? What can ordinary people do to push back against AI? All of those sorts of things. A lot of folks are feeling helpless.
Yeah. I don't want people to feel helpless in this. I want people to feel motivated. I want people to recognize that none of this is inevitable. None of this is um, just a given in the world. All they wouldn't be trying to sell us on this so hard if it was inevitable, natural, a given, right? Like they would not be weaving this in surreptitiously into everything they possibly could to try to make us use it if it was a given. These things can be recognized, they can be pushed back against. I mean, for those of us in the United States, as simple as, organizing the people in your community to understand the effects of this, to call your senators right now in this case, if you want to make sure that there are such things as regulations on AI. They're talking about a 10-year moratorium on AI regulation. By that point, the rate of change in AI at that state is such that any new regulation 10 years from now is like if you were to walk onto the surface of Mars and try to design a legal system from scratch, right? Like that's not a viable way to move forward. That ship then will have sailed, but there is time to stop it now. There are ways to stop it to say, I don't want this. You push back in your communities, you push back in your groups of people, you point to better and different ways. There are people who are trying to make more environmentally friendly AI models, who are trying to make things like guardrails, who are trying to develop systems that are only using consent given materials, people who have agreed to have their work in these models rather than just scraping whatever you can and using it whether people say yes or no, right? These are different ways forward. They are viable, they are real, they are no more fantastical than a large language model in and of itself, right? Anybody who tells you it's an imposition, it's too hard, it's impossible, is telling you that because they have a very vested interest in it being the way that it currently is. They want that to be the way of things from now on, the way that they have control over, the way that they have a say in. But there are other ways.
We learn about them, we promote them, we talk about them at length. We push back against these things when we say, hey, yeah, you say that this thing is supposed to be an everything tool. It's a Swiss Army knife of a toolkit, right? Okay, does it do that though? Is it for that? Show me. Prove it to me. One of the most recurrent pieces of anecdata that you've got out there, you've got people who always talk about this framework of this thing that I know nothing about. AI seems really, really great at it. But when I try to use it for my job, it seems like it doesn't know what it's talking about. I'll just use it to help me with this thing I don't know anything about. Right? Like what? There's something missing there, right? Like there's a there's a dissonance and a disconnect. If it doesn't know anything about your job, if it's bad at this thing that you're like really, really good at, and you can see why it's bad at that, it's probably pretty bad at this other stuff too. Showing that to people, highlighting it, is one of the clearest ways in to get people to recognize that this stuff isn't necessarily perfect or, again, inevitable in any way, shape, or form. It's a line we've been sold for very specific reasons.
Wonderful and empowering. So, let's see the next question. Uh, Justin Carey would like to hear your thoughts about individual intellect or this idea of an individual genius versus a more holistic understanding of human intelligence, a more collective intelligence concept, especially in the framework of these intersubjective realities that you spoke about, laws, gods, myths, etc.
There is this tension in our society where we seek the individual genius very often. We seek the person who like did the things, right? Einstein, Isaac Newton, Octavia Butler. We've got geniuses. Ursula Le Guin was a genius. Ursula Le Guin wrote so many books on so many things, made her own translation of the I Ching, made her own tarot deck, wrote ridiculous amounts of really careful science fiction, right? All of these people had support networks. All of these people had tools that they were able to make use of in their lives that allowed them to do and to be who they were. Genius, even if we want to be able to say that there is such a thing as an individual person who seems to have it more than other people, it doesn't exist by itself. No thought, no intellectual activity exists external to a community, right? No artist who has time and ability to cultivate their skill and their work does so without being able to, in some way, shape, or form, support the other parts of life. No creative writer, no author, no researcher. If I did not have a network of friends, loved ones, and the school in which I operate, I could not do this, right? Nowhere near as often, nowhere near as easily or as well, because I have access to things that allow me to have these conversations, that let me think and work on these ideas at all, let alone well. And so even in that kind of, maybe there are some people who, get the opportunity to spend more time arranging ideas and can arrange ideas in ways that are more likely to be taken up by people. But they do that with the help of other people. They do that in context with other people. They do that because other people have helped them. And because they've thought with other people, because they have been exposed to other thoughts than their own. It's never one or the other. It is always a communal experience that we each take into ourselves individually and express from ourselves in a unique way that no one else in the world will ever express, right? And then that will go out into the world and it will become a communal experience that somebody else will take into themselves and will put out in a unique way that no one else will ever express. It's always both.
All right, we've got 2 questions left, but it is 3:30.
I did 2 questions.
Okay. So first, from Ryan Randall, another thank you. A small clarifying question. Soon after you shared the faked imagery around Helene damage, you described a space in which people can make wild claims without usual requirement for evidence as a liar's noun.
Yeah.
Could you just share again what that noun was? It seems like a very useful term.
Liar's dividend. And this is a specific term of art. I'm missing the exact citation right off the top of my head, but I will make sure that the citation is included in the notes when I give the slides out as well, because it is a very useful conceptual framework. The liar's dividend is basically, if I can make you doubt, if I can tell a lie and make you doubt the truth, it doesn't matter if you think I'm telling you the truth, even. I gain something by having you doubt what the truth is at all. Even if my goal to fully deceive you is not accomplished, I gain something by planting the seed of doubt. That's the liar's dividend. That space opens up for more doubt. And then I can lie more easily because there's more doubt. There's less shared understanding of the world, and I can deceive more readily. If I know what's true and I know that other people don't, oh, I can have a field day.
All right, and our final question from Liz, is accuracy a value that could be embedded in these models, even theoretically?
That's an important question, and it comes down to what we mean by accuracy and in what context. So we can be accurate in terms of accurately representing the data that it has been trained on, right? We can increase the accuracy of representation within the models. That is doable, and that's what many people have been working on with tools like retrieval augmented generation, with reinforcement from human feedback. All of these things are ways of trying to go about increasing the accuracy of the representation of the vectors in the data set. However, even then, all we're doing is representing the vectors in the data set more accurately. So if the data itself is bad, we're still in a bad place. So go back to that GIF that I posted kind of early on in the very brief explanation of generative AI, right? You know, man, woman, king, queen. That's not just a representation of nouns in relationship to each other. That's a representation of gender bias. You can see how close man and king are to each other in that vector map. You can see how close woman and queen are to each other in that vector map, and how far king and queen are from each other, and man and woman are from each other, how even further away from each other man and queen and woman and king are from each other. The statistical mapping of how often those things are related to each other in the data set that made that vector map says that those words aren't related to each other very closely at all. And that's whatever for man, woman, king, queen, but it also reproduces that same kind of like association for woman president, woman doctor, woman CEO, etc. Man nurse, man teacher. So that's a problem. right? But the fact of the matter remains, based on what that system has been trained on, the data it has in order to represent the world says that those words are less often associated with each other. Those words do not appear in the text near each other often because they don't. Because how many female presidents have there been? How many female CEOs are there? Right? And that is a true fact about the nature of the world as it is and has been. Is that a true fact about what we want the world to look like in the future? Because if we depend on these systems based on what they've been trained on, then that's the world we're saying we want to generate through these tools, because that's the world they're trained to generate. So they're accurately mapping and representing their data. But that's not all we want from these types of systems. That's not how we think about what they're supposed to be for. But it is what they do. And that does influence everything we can do with them.
What an incredibly great way to to end your presentation, Dr. Williams. Thank you all so much. And to all of our attendees, thank you for joining as well. You will be getting at least one email from me, quite likely two, with the slides as well as any information that I have about the recorded presentation. Again, our presenter, Dr. Damien Patrick Williams. I'm Wynn Davis from Durham County Library in Durham, North Carolina. Thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thanks so much.
Bye.